Good morning and welcome to CP24's Remembrance Day Special 2023. There are events happening right across the country today as Canadians stop and remember those who've made the ultimate sacrifice while serving their country, and also to thank those that continue to serve. CP24 has team coverage all morning long as we are on the ground, as you can see, live at Old City Hall, also outside Sunnybrook Veterans Centre where all those flags have been planted overnight, and we'll also take you live to Queen's Park and the National War Memorial in Ottawa for a sense of those ceremonies as well. We'll also be joined by special guests in studio who will walk us through everything that's happening today. We begin live downtown Toronto, though, as hundreds of dignitaries and guests are also getting set for the Remembrance Day ceremony at Old City Hall. This is a live look from that scene at the moment. There will be the arrivals of sentries coming down the steps of Old City Hall to surround the cenotaph. They include representatives from HMCS York and the 48th Highlanders of Canada. Toronto's Mayor Olivia Chow will be speaking this morning during the service. That'll be her first time as mayor. And we will also be expecting a flypast this morning by the Canadian Harvard Aircraft Association. A service of remembrance is also being held at Sunnybrook Veterans Centre this morning. Flags, as you've likely been seeing for the last 24 hours, have been planted all around the hospital's Bayview campus. This to honor and appreciate those who served their country. This year's campaign also incorporates artwork designed by an Indigenous artist alongside the Canadian flags, again marking the sacrifices and contributions made by First Nations, Inuit and Métis veterans in service to Canada. And let's take you live to Queen's Park this morning as well, where an outdoor service is being held today at the Ontario Veterans Memorial. This is on the front lawn of the Legislative Assembly. Ontario Premier Doug Ford will deliver remarks along with Brigadier General J.J. Major, commander of the 4th Canadian Division. That's getting underway too. And of course, in our nation's capital, a ceremony at the National War Memorial in Ottawa, that is just getting underway as well. The Governor General presides over that annual event. The Prime Minister, government officials, diplomatic representatives, veterans, and of course the general public will also be at that event. Well, good morning from 299 Queen Street West. This is Toronto's breaking news, CP24. Again, thank you for joining us. I'm Nick Dixon. Thank you for being here for this Remembrance Day special. Of course, every year on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, people from coast to coast pause and honor and remember the more than 2 million men and women who served and continue to serve during times of war, conflict, and peace. We remember the more than 118,000 Canadians who gave their lives, and we also remember Canadian peacekeepers who've taken part in many operations to keep peace in countries around the world over the past 75 years and who continue to do so today. This week marks several significant milestones, such as the 70th anniversary of the Korean Armistice Agreement, which signaled an end to the Korean War. Nearly 30,000 Canadians served during that conflict, which began in 1950. 516 Canadians were killed during the Korean War, and about 38 of them had connections to Toronto. This week is also the 75th anniversary of Canadian participation in peacekeeping missions for the United Nations. Let's go live now to CP24's Eden Debeba. She is outside Old City Hall as the ceremony there is set to begin in just a few minutes. Eden, good morning to you. What's happening there now?
Good morning to you, Nick. It's all quiet here, but there is quite the crowd coming all along Bay Street. There's road closures in the area, almost working in the favor of today's event because, again, there are quite a few people out and about. I had the chance to speak to a few of them, ask them why it was so important to come out today. And one of those was Liz Hammond, an Indigenous woman whose father served in the Korean War, who shared her personal story just a few minutes earlier today. She told me about the difficult choice he made between either going to a residential school or serving his country, and he chose the latter. And while she's very proud of him for doing that, it's unfortunate the reasons why he was pushed towards that. So that was her takeaway, that Remembrance Day, every veteran has their own very personal story, and it takes a lot to share them with us. I mean, we'll hear from some veterans later today in today's ceremony, but for now, Nick, I'm going to send it back to you. We're expecting it to get underway in just a few minutes' time.
Eden, thank you. We will look forward to that. Now, also here to help us guide us through today's ceremonies and also provide some greater insight into the proceedings, I'm pleased to be joined by Lieutenant Colonel James Stalker, Chief of Staff, 32 Canadian Brigade Group, and retired Major Paul Hale, President of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry Association. Paul, James, if I don't mind if I call you by your first names, really appreciate having you both here this morning. Paul, let's start with you here. You had a wonderful career in the Canadian military. You've been retired for about 10 years or so. Where does your mind go on Remembrance Day?
Well, I think about all the different people I served with. In particular, I think about Private John Brzezinski. 17 September 1976, I was a 22-year-old platoon commander in Wainwright on my first night in the exercise, and John was tragically killed in a vehicle accident. And as I explained, he never became a father. His parents never had grandchildren. So that's one of the primary reasons that I remember, and that applies to many other individuals.
Absolutely, yeah. That's really difficult to imagine. James, how about you? What do you think of on this day every year?
I like Paul, I think about those who I've been fortunate enough to serve with in my career thus far, and I also think about kind of the changing nature of veteranhood. You know, we have, I think, an image in our minds of veterans being kind of the World War II generation or even earlier, and of course now there have been, as you noted, over 100,000 Canadians who've served in sort of the interwar period or the post-war period, various peacekeeping missions, more recently Afghanistan, up impact in Iraq and Kuwait, and again more recently in Eastern Europe. So sort of the nature of veteranhood is really constantly evolving, and I try to keep that front of mind on the 11th.
And Paul, of course, we mentioned in the introduction there the significance of the 70th anniversary of the end of the Korean War, and you were telling me that you were in Korea in the summer at an event there. Could you tell us a bit more about that and the significance?
I had the privilege of being invited to attend the 70th anniversary of the Armistice because my volunteer work with the Kapyong Trail. Mm-hmm. What was interesting is there was actually 62 veterans who fought in the Korean War, 11 of them Canadian. Excuse me, and one of them actually fought at the Battle of Kapyong. In Canadian books, Kapyong is not a significant battle because there were really only 10 killed. However, in the Korean outlook, it's very significant because I think it was the fourth time they stopped the North Koreans from almost entering Seoul. Mm-hmm. So in their books, they honestly revere the veterans from all those countries, and it was a humbling experience to travel with them.
Mm-hmm. I can only imagine, yeah. And James, you know, to you now, let's talk a little bit more about your career and your experience as well with the Canadian Armed Forces here. You know, when you think about what you have done over those years, what stands out to you the most? Or I mean, I'm sure you don't rank it in terms of importance, but just in terms of your thoughts of the impact you've been able to have.
I mean, I think the first thing I think of when I think about a career is the wonderful people I've gotten to work with. You know, from the very get to sort of where I am now, the people make your day-to-day, make your job. And then I think the sort of the standout moments for me were always the operational moments. So the tour in Afghanistan, the tour on Up Impact, and then most recently the COVID op laser deployment into long-term care. Those are kind of the three standout events for me. Mm-hmm. If you look at Paul's rack here, he's got no doubt just a few more tours than I did in his career.
Yeah.
But I think for a lot of soldiers, sailors, and aviators, it is the operational deployments that are the standouts. That is when you need to put your skills to practice in a very real way.
Paul, when you get dressed today and you put on those medals, I mean, it is, as James said, a great rack. I didn't even know that was what they were referred to. What does that mean to you when you put those medals on and you put that poppy on above it as well?
That's a very good question. I've served on 8 different tours, 8 different experiences. Mm-hmm. And every soldier's tour is different. You know, even though I've got 2 tours in Afghanistan, my 2 tours were in Kabul. They weren't in Kandahar. I have a lot more respect and time for all those who served in Kandahar. I didn't have the opportunity. Also at that point, I was basically 55, so I'm not sure I would have been able to keep up with 30-year-olds.
Right.
But I have respect for anybody, and at the same time, the number of medals don't count. Mm-hmm. There are soldiers who only did 1 tour, so they have 1 tour in Afghanistan. They put their life on the line, they took the risk, they did their job, and they were all part of the team. So whether you have 1 or even none, you still served, and you get my respect for that service.
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. And a tour is a tour. You know, if you've deployed, you have deployed. Whether in a rear area in a large base, whether you're patrolling every day, that it's still honourable service to the country and to Canada's interests overseas.
A simple example is my wife. She has a CD2. She never got a chance to serve overseas. But when she worked at the DIV headquarters, she was responsible for the casualty notification and tracking that.
Wow.
That in itself put a lot of pressure on her. Mm-hmm. You know, she actually rode from Trenton to Toronto on one of the convoys with a deceased soldier. Yeah. So even though she didn't serve overseas, she served in Canada, and they all should be recognized regardless of where they served.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. And speaking of recognition, James, I know you're incredibly humble, and I know you're thinking about all of the people you've served with, both past and present. But I want to talk about an event that you were at this week at Rideau Hall, getting a decoration in honor from the Governor General. I wonder if you could, we have some pictures from that event earlier this week. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what that was and what that means, if you can put it into perspective for us.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks for that. So that was I was honored to receive a Meritorious Service Medal, which I've not yet had time to have mounted. It was a couple of days ago. It does take a little bit of time.
Yeah.
And that was for meritorious service in during op laser. That's my lovely wife Ashley there on the screen, my better half. And we were honored to come to Rideau Hall to receive that decoration. That was primarily awarded for, like I said, service during laser, where I was fortunate to be a task force commander that went into long-term care facilities across Ontario and provide some assistance and relief to those who were hardest hit by COVID in the early phases. And I was mentioning before that they did do a number of remote ceremonies over the pandemic, and my wife and I opted to wait until they resumed in person, because I think that has a little more impact. So we were lucky enough to go to Rideau, a couple of days in Ottawa, and receive that from the Governor General. It was tremendously humbling, especially when you hear the other citations being read of the other award recipients, meritorious service crosses or medals, and these are really Canada's very finest. These are heroes, and I'm just humbled to be there.
Well, we appreciate that, and appreciate the service you did, and of course you being here this morning as well. Third year in a row, I should point out that you've been joining us here. As we're looking right now live down at Old City Hall, as things are getting underway for the Remembrance Day ceremony there, let's talk a little bit about the sort of the precision and the planning that goes into an event like this. Paul, I'm sure you're pretty familiar with what it would take to sort of pull off a ceremony like this each and every year.
Well, right now, what you just saw was the start of positioning the sentries on the cenotaph. So they're being positioned there basically to symbolize guarding the cemetery, guarding those who sacrificed their lives. They'll march there, they'll basically put their arms on rest, and they're pretty well static for about 20 minutes or so, which takes a lot of self-discipline just to do that in honor of those who've made the ultimate sacrifice.
And again, you're seeing the different really ages, races, diversity of the Canadian Armed Forces members who are taking part today, past and present, right? It's really great to see so much of Canada represented at events like this.
Yes, indeed. So 32 Brigade, which mounts the guard in particular at Queen's Park, is about 3,000 people from sort of all demographics, primarily reservists in the GTA. So you get a really fantastic cross-section. You see that guard formed up from the various units in their refinery, and again, composed of some of the finest young Canadians.
Absolutely here, and sort of they're getting into place, like you said, ready to surround the cenotaph. It's been interesting to see too. In years past, we've seen different uniforms of different, World War I, World War II, Korea, etc., and Afghanistan represented at this ceremony here. And as you mentioned, there is that changing face of veterans in Canada. We so much associate it with World War I and World War II. But it's really important that we recognize, Paul. I think I can start with you on this. The fact that Canadian soldiers have been in active duty throughout recent history, not just the old dusty textbooks, as it were, and the old black and white films.
Well, very, very true. 2 weeks ago, the Lawrence Scots presented their colors, and they got 5 new battle honors. One was Afghanistan, the other four were from the War of 1812. So the history goes back from basically 1812 to now, and we're still making history with soldiers, training soldiers for the Ukraine.
Yeah.
We've got soldiers in the Middle East, sailors, in China, on the South China Sea. Again, they're doing their job to try and keep peace so that we don't, hopefully, go back to war again.
And it is, we, of course, have to speak recently. Of course, there's a war happening in the Middle East right now that, of course, continues to be the Russian war in Ukraine as well. James, I wonder, when you continue to hear about this and hear about the Canadian coordination, cooperation with these, whether it's weapons, whether it's training, etc. Canada is involved at various sort of levels or degrees, but Canada continues to be pushing for peace and pushing for stability. Yeah,
quite right. And I think when you look at, obviously the Russian invasion of Ukraine and then the more recent events in the Middle East, which were essentially unpredictable, it speaks to the unpredictable nature of global affairs. And so in the military, our business is general readiness. It is to be ready and to expect the unexpected and to be prepared. And I think that's where sort of soldiers see themselves.
Of course, it's not surprising to see soldiers on Remembrance Day, whether they're retired or still in active service. But when you see the crowds that gather at the various cenotaphs, whether it's throughout Toronto or just throughout the country, how does that make you feel?
It makes me feel proud that they're remembering everybody. Because what I don't know is how many people in those crowds are the daughters, granddaughters, grandsons of veterans.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of them are also there for that reason, that they're honoring their family history, and it's a chance to show it.
James, what about you? What goes through your mind when you see the crowds too?
When I see the crowds, when I see the outpouring of support, when I see the outpouring of remembrance, I think to me it's an antidote to cynicism, and it's a reminder that people do care and that this sacrifice was important.
Absolutely. Now, we want to cover a little bit of what else has been happening throughout the day here on Remembrance Day. Of course, the 95th annual sunrise service of the Cross at the Cross of Sacrifice was held at Prospect Cemetery earlier this morning. I want to take you back there briefly before we come back to Old City Hall. Hundreds of soldiers and veterans, of course, are buried in Prospect Cemetery, which dates back to 1890. The Remembrance Day ceremony here was started in the years following the end of the First World War.
Our minds reflect on the thousands of soldiers of different faiths, cultures, and identities who fought and died together, but ultimately alone. Without their individual and collective strength, courage, and sacrifice, we would not enjoy the lives today that we too often take for granted, and so we grieve with their families and friends. Our gratitude for what they did is beyond measure, and we will never forget.
Taking the 2 minutes of silence, honoring us, going up and shaking a soldier's hand and saying thank you for doing what they do best to keep the peace, to give us what we need, and let them know they're doing a great job. We all signed up to Service Canada, and I think the young people should let them, the soldiers today know they appreciate it.
And we want to, of course, remind our viewers that the following streets are also going to be closed for the Old City Hall Remembrance Day service. The closure began about 10 o'clock this morning. So from Bay Street to Albert to Richmond Street West, with local access really only from Albert Street from southbound Bay. And then Queen Street west from Bay Street to east of York Street. TTC buses and streetcars also will be diverted. Again, let's go back right now to CP24's Eden Beba live outside Old City Hall. The ceremony there is about to begin. We're about to hear from the Master of Ceremonies. But Eden, a pretty good-sized crowd there gathering for this Remembrance Day.
Absolutely, braving the cold and the gloomy skies to come and pay their respects to Canada's fallen soldiers. As you mentioned, we saw the arrival of sentries. We're now seeing the arrival of the Honor Guard, hearing the band play. A lot of people standing at attention, and you don't typically see the downtown streets of Toronto so quiet. But aside from the band playing right now, Nick, I can tell you it's completely quiet here. A lot of people just rapt attention. It seems a lot of people deep in thought as well, thinking about the lives lost and how they can best pay their respects to those fallen soldiers, Nick. As you said, this event is set to get underway shortly. Master Ceremony set to speak. There's a lot of dignitaries up there as well, a lot of members of Parliament, local city councillors as well, Mayor Olivia Chow. So a lot of people set to speak, and a lot of here clearly ready to listen. Sending it back to you.
Yeah, we heard from Mayor Chow earlier this morning at the sunrise ceremony, and we'll be hearing from her again throughout that ceremony too. Eden, appreciate this. Thank you. The Premier also issuing a Remembrance Day statement today. It reads in part, "These heroes who made the ultimate sacrifice defended our values on the front lines of world wars, international conflicts, and peacekeeping missions. They courageously stepped into harm's way so others wouldn't have to. We owe them a debt of gratitude that we can never repay. To those serving today, we recognize the hardships you and your families face, particularly those deployed overseas or away from their homes. We're so grateful for your bravery, your sacrifices, and your service to our country." And let's bring back Lieutenant Colonel James Stalker, Chief of Staff, 32 Canadian Brigade Group, and retired Major Paul Hale, also the President of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry Association. Gentlemen, I'm so pleased to have both of you here today as we cover this Remembrance Day from several different angles here. I wanted to mention the Silver Cross Mother this year. That is, I find that just to be so powerful and poignant year after year, hearing from someone who's lost, representing all military families and losses. Paul, I'm sure you've had an opportunity over the years to speak to Silver Cross mothers. What do you think it means to them, and how significant are those mothers?
I think it's the country formally recognizing the pain and sacrifice that they've done. The other thing, honestly, about the Silver Cross, when Nicola Goddard passed away, that's when they realized that, yes, we'd concentrated on the Silver Cross mother, but we also forgot the rest of the family, and they've increased it now so you can get 3 of them, and a husband. In fact, Nicola Goddard's husband was the first husband to get a Silver Cross. So we've moved forward in recognizing the sacrifices and the impact on the families.
Yeah, and it is an enormous impact, isn't it, James? I mean, even, you talk about one of your deployments, you went to Afghanistan, but you also talk about during COVID, in the peak of COVID, you were assigned to be working at long-term care homes with this pandemic happening. We didn't really know. That must have been difficult on your family, on your wife. I don't know if your son was born at that point, but the challenges there, that kind of sacrifice as well, it's a completely different thing that was completely unexpected. Completely unexpected?
Certainly nothing that we had trained for, but again, it's an idea of general readiness, that you have a general problem-solving capability, you throw expert advice into it, and you try to come up with the best solution you can. No, we didn't have a kid at the time, but certainly extremely tough on the families to be separated from the soldiers, sailors, and aviators. And I think the thing to note during that deployment in particular was folks were concerned about their family's own safety. So they were deployed away from home for, at the time, it was 3.5, 4 months, into long-term care and worried about what was going on the home front. And I think it really speaks to what Paul said about the sacrifice of those families, and that we can only really do what we do with the support of the families.
Right. Typically, you go to a battle and you think your family is safe at home, but during a pandemic, that was so different. Paul, of course, you have experience in peacekeeping as well, which perhaps doesn't get enough attention when from the Canadian side of things. I wonder if you could speak to that today, you know, the element of Canadian peacekeeping and that significance too.
I can. Peacekeeping is not considered as hazardous as combat. However, you have the same skill sets, you just ratchet them down for that occasion. But it can be just as lethal. In 1988, I was 2IC Adam Company for 3 PPCLI, and Private Tom Trottier died during the tour. And I approached the commanding officer, Harry Elliott, about putting in a stained glass window. And as soon as he said yes, I had more money from all the soldiers to easily pay for the window. And in the end, it was very healing for the soldiers. They did something to remember a friend. We brought the father and his twin brother over, and it was very healing. It was worthwhile. Yeah. That stained glass window, since we've closed the mission in Cyprus, is now at the Patricia Regimental Museum in Calgary.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. How difficult is it to ratchet down? Because, you know, we've heard James talking a lot about general readiness, but the idea if you're peacekeeping, you're ratcheting down, but also you need to be prepared for anything.
Yeah, you're prepared. Simple thing, you still got to, when someone is very tense, you've got to be that calm voice. And what I found, a couple of my tours, I was unarmed. I don't smoke. I carried cigarettes. Because you can diffuse the situation by offering a smoke to someone.
Yeah.
It means they have to take their hand off the weapon. Yeah. They lean into you. So what you're doing is you're slowly taking control of the situation in a non-hostile manner.
Yeah.
And ratcheting it down so you get them to be calm, relax. You don't want to pull that trigger. Yeah. You want us to walk away. But you've got those skill sets, so you can go from 0 to 120 if you have to.
Right, right.
Okay? You hope you never have to, but peacekeeping, your aim is to maintain the peace. Yeah. The one thing I'll say is there has to be peace to maintain. And when I was in Bosnia, the 3 sides, there wasn't peace at that time. Yeah. And it was very difficult for a lot of the soldiers because when they came back, the families didn't realize what they had done. And a very simple example is Medak. The Canadian soldiers did their job, but for whatever reason, it was covered up by the government for 10 years. The mental health damage to those soldiers, because when they came home, some of them were told by their parents, you're lying because there's nothing in the news.
Yeah.
Okay? And in my experience, it's mostly people from the 90s who have problems because at that point, we didn't have a mental health system. My last tour, 8th tour, I'm very cynical. The road to mental readiness is outstanding and what was done. They had a wife talk about the stresses she faced at home. The social worker only talked for about 10% of the time. But it was the wife, they had a corporal do the same thing, talk about his. But it was excellent. It was very well done.
And Paul, while you've been speaking, we've been watching down at the National War Memorial in Ottawa. Governor General Mary Simon is just arriving here. Perhaps let's listen in for a moment here, just take a feel of the scene here. Have either of you gentlemen been to the National War Memorial on Remembrance Day?
I was when I served with the Cameron Highlanders of Ottawa. So back around, 1977 or so.
Yeah.
So,
it's been a while.
It's quite a while.
Yeah.
Or before that.
Of course, there's new significance, after Nathan Cirillo was killed at the National War Memorial about 10 years ago or so. the National Memorial took on, I think, a new significance at that point. You know, Canadians, we're not like Americans in terms of our remembrance or perhaps the way we honor military throughout the year, et cetera. I wonder what your thoughts are on that ground, on that space.
Well, it is sacred space. I think a lot of veterans get upset when they see people, you know, for example, no offense with the Americans, putting an American flag on the tomb of a Canadian unknown soldier. And things that happened during the COVID, when you had the truckers' convoy. And that upsets a lot because the respect, that lone soldier at the War Memorial represents every soldier, sailor, or air person who've served in the military. And to us, it's sacred ground.
Absolutely. James, when was the last time you were there?
I've actually never been to the National.
Really?
I've always been a Toronto guy, so I've done Old City Hall, I've done Queen's Park, and I've been overseas for a couple of them as well, which obviously has a very different flavor.
Yeah, and of course Queen's Park has the Afghanistan Memorial that was brought in just a few years ago. I wonder, as someone who took part in the Afghanistan tours in Afghanistan, you know, the significance of being recognized and represented there as well.
Yeah, I think very meaningful to all the personnel who served in Afghanistan is that level of recognition. And again, whatever your tour, whatever your role, it's important to see that society recognizes the service and the sacrifice. That was quite meaningful.
Indeed. Okay, let's listen back in now down at Toronto City Hall. This is Aretha Phillips, Chief of Protocol. These are some opening remarks. She is the Master of Ceremony, so let's listen live again down at Old City Hall.
Slave trade and slavery. We pay tribute to our ancestors of African origin and descent. Should you wish to follow the program on your own device today, you can find it online at toronto.ca/lest we forget. The vigil sentries today are mounted by the 48th Highlanders of Canada, a primary reserve regiment of the Canadian Forces, joined by HMCS York, who commemorate their 100th anniversary this year. The sentries appear in period uniforms from the First and Second World Wars, led by Warrant Officer Duff, who wears historic dress from 1891. Please rise as you are able and join in the singing of our national anthem, which will be followed by the last post, the silence, the lament, and the rouse. Please remain standing until after the reading of the Act of Remembrance and the commitment to remember.
And that was the 2 minutes of silence right there. Now we're listening to the last post by, the lament by Pipe Major Andrew Bennett of the Toronto Scottish Regiment.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
Promesse de se souvenir. Ils étaient jeunes, jeunes comme nous. Ils ont servi, donnant généreusement d'eux-mêmes. Nous leur promettons, en dépit du temps qui passe, de porter le flambeau et de ne jamais oublier. Nous nous souviendrons d'eux. Réponse, nous nous souviendrons d'eux. They were young as we are young. They served, given freely of themselves. To them we pledge, amid the winds of time, to carry their torch and never forget. We will remember them. We will remember them.
Please be seated. I wish to recognize the flypast of Canadian Harvard aircraft, which were used in training Canadian and Commonwealth airmen during the Second World War. I'd also like to thank Alan Roy for reading the Act of Remembrance, and Stephen Menza, Executive Director, Toronto Youth Cabinet, for reading the Commitment to Remember. I now wish to call upon Her Worship Olivia Chow, Mayor of Toronto, to address the gathering.
Good morning. I'm humbled to join you on Remembrance Day. The people of Toronto has been gathering on the steps of Old City Hall to remember the fallen since 1919, the first anniversary of the end of the First World War over 100 years ago. This year, we also commemorate the 70th anniversary of the end of Korean War, which claimed the lives of 516 Canadians, and at least 38 of them have a connection to Toronto. This year also marks 75 years of Canadian participation in United Nations peacekeeping missions. In time of war, the pursuit for peace has been a historic role for Canada. Over 125,000 Canadians have served and are serving in United Nations peacekeeping at home and around the world. Today, we honor their contributions and remember the 130 Canadians who have died in UN operations, including 8 from Toronto. It was August 9th, 1974, when the news broke of the Buffalo 9. The 9 Canadian peacekeepers who were killed as the aircraft they were in, a Canadian Buffalo, was shot down. It was the greatest loss of life in Canadian peacekeeping operations. Among the casualties was Toronto resident Corporal Michael William Simpson. He enlisted in the Canadian Army at age 16 and spent a decade supervising ceasefires and volunteering for deployment to the UN Emergency Force Middle East, before losing his life in service at a tender age of 26. Corporal Simpson's mother, Loyola Helen Park, became the first mother of the peacekeeper to receive the National Memorial Cross Mother recognition. Another incredible peacekeeper is that of William Shimbushi, who also are from Toronto. Bill was a fighter jet navigator and a member of the 425 AW Squadron in the Royal Canadian Air Force. He was called Shimbo by his peers. He served during the Cold War and in the 60s when Canada's Air Force was the main line of defense against the Soviet threat. Bill was part of the crew that flew one of the last Canadian-designed fighters, the CF-100, and worked within the North American Air Defense Command, or NORAD. Bill and his crew played a crucial role in keeping the peace among strong geopolitical tensions. He passed away at the age of 85 and was remembered for his warmth that touched many. Like Corporal Simpson and fighter jet navigator Shimbo, Canadians from various backgrounds stepped forward to defend the peace and freedoms we enjoy today. Residents of Toronto have a long and proud history of participating in the Canadian forces, including in the reserve forces. 2023 marks the 100th anniversary of the Naval Reserves of Canada and HMCS York, training facilities right here in Toronto. We see many men and women in uniform with us today, reminding us of their enduring commitment and the great responsibility they shoulder. We honor their service to the nation. For those who have paid the ultimate price for their service, let us never forget their sacrifices. As we mourn the more than 10,000 Toronto residents who have fallen in conflicts over the years, let this day of remembrance also help us hold strong to the power of peace, lest we forget.
Thank you to the Elmer Eisler Singers, conducted by Lydia Adams, accompanied by the 7th Toronto Regiment, Royal Canadian Artillery Band, directed by Lieutenant Karia Lam. This musical version of this famous poem in Flanders Fields, written by John McCrae in 1915, was arranged by Lydia Adams with music by the Central Band of the Canadian Armed Forces. Its depiction of poppies growing between the graves of the fallen soldiers give rise to the tradition of wearing red poppies in remembrance. We will now present the wreaths. The first wreath today will be led by Her Worship, Mary Olivia Chow, on behalf of the City of Toronto. Government and Parliament of Canada, Talib Noor Mohammed, Member of Parliament, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Canadian Heritage. Province of Ontario, Kristen Wong-Tam, MPP, Toronto Centre, accompanied by Merritt Stiles, Leader of the Official Opposition, and Jessica Bell, MPP, University Rosedale. Veterans Affairs Canada, Tabitha Stubbs, Chief of Staff to the Deputy Minister.
So we're watching now as the presentation of wreaths is underway down at Old City Hall for the Remembrance Day ceremony, the annual Remembrance Day ceremony, of course, in Toronto, one of several taking part not only around Toronto, but the GTA and, of course, the countrywide today on this Remembrance Day. And as we watch the wreaths being presented, gentlemen, Paul, if I could perhaps start with you. When you see the wreaths being laid and people, making that honor, honoring the sacrifices here, what goes through your mind when you see these wreaths being laid by various groups, some of them government, some of them military, some of them, the youth of Toronto, for example, laying a wreath today as well?
You made a good point. It's part of, I think it's the number of wreaths. Mm-hmm. How many different organizations, how many groups. Like you said, youth, a lot of the youth ones, the wreaths are handmade. They're not professionally bought. So the amount of energy it takes them and thought as to why are you making this, why are you remembering. There's others that are laid by families to remember one individual, but then you have the government laying on behalf of all Canadians.
Let's just listen in one more time just to get a sense as we listen in to the ceremony as the wreath presentation continues.
Royal Canadian Legion, Vic Singh, District Poppy Campaign.
You talk about the youth, Paul. You also you speak to a lot of classes about the Canadian military and service and war, etc. What do you find the receptiveness is in some cases?
Well, yesterday I talked to Holy Cross Catholic School in Danforth area, and they were 340, I think, in the school, from kindergarten to grade 8. The student council was grade 8, and they had the young kids, and the young children in kindergarten did in Flanders Field. Mm. And some of them don't realize what it's all about, except that they'll have to be serious. But then the questions they come up and ask you afterwards, why did you do, why did you serve, what did you do, what did you see? You don't have enough time to answer them.
Yeah.
It's worthwhile because it educates them. At the same time, when I do the Remembrance talk, I also talk about the fact the military does a lot more, as you did, Lintus,
yeah.
Floods, fires. So you talk about the other side of the military, not just the war fighting.
Yeah, absolutely. I was embedded, for example, with HMCS Halifax during Ophesia in Haiti when they were going over to sort of help rebuild, after the earthquake in 2010, I think it was. The years kind of fly by, but just watching, Canadian service people in action there, helping, whether it was, get people food or helping the rebuilding process, the clearing process. There was so much work to be done. Again, not fighting, but work that was necessary. James, you have a young son who probably doesn't quite understand what Daddy does, but again, it is important that the stories and the history be taught and told.
Yes, I completely agree. And to establish that link through the generations is critically important. And if you'll tolerate one story from deployment into long-term care, unfortunately, one of the homes we were working in, unfortunately, had a resident pass away. And we had a number of very, very young reservists who were working in these homes doing really incredible work. And a couple of the troops were 19-year-olds from the Queensland Rifles of Canada, which is a very storied regiment right here out of Toronto. And in clearing out this gentleman's effects, they found actually paraphernalia from that regiment. He'd actually been a World War II veteran from that regiment. And it was a really immediate reminder that this is iterative and it flows through generations. Just finding out that guy was in the same regiment, I think, made it very real to these young soldiers who were serving in the home. So to Paul's point, it's critically important to establish that link. Through generations.
Definitely, and we're seeing, the evidence of the generation, some of the, older veterans here, whether it's at the Old City Hall service or, of course, up at Sunnybrook, which we'll be showing our viewers, later on in this special today. There is also that changing face of veterans, James, that I know that you've been really highlighting. I wanted to speak about that because it is important that we recognize veterans there's such a huge range.
Yes, that's right. When I was a younger man, the World War I veterans were the elderly gentlemen. We had World War II veterans who were maybe a little older than my father's age. Maybe I'm just dating myself now. And then you had, of course, the peacekeeping era and sort of the post-war era missions overseas. Now it's a different face. The World War I veterans have passed from the scene. The World War II veterans were coming up on the 80th anniversary of D-Day. So you think about if you took part in D-Day, essentially you're going to be 100 plus years old anyway. Korean War veterans not far behind. But there's another whole generation of veterans who are coming up. Peacekeeping missions, smaller missions through the 90s. Afghanistan was a major piece for the Canadian forces, and now we're 10 years post that mission as well. So we have missions in Iraq, Kuwait, and then of course shoring up our Eastern European flank. So there's a whole new generation of veterans that are coming out that I think it's important to keep in mind that represents veteranhood as well.
Absolutely, and this is live actually at Sunnybrook now, giving our viewers a sense of what's happening there as the honors and tributes to our veterans, some 200 plus at Sunnybrook. And it is remarkable. You see the flags, the Plant a Flag program, Paul. I wonder if I can go back to you on that. Just when you look at the lawns of Sunnybrook, it's been 13 years they've been doing this beautiful tribute. I wonder what your thoughts are when you see that and you see the work and dedication and commitment that goes into that.
Well, I was watching a clip yesterday about a lady at Sunnybrook who made 75 glass poppies.
Yes.
So her way of remembering, she served during World War II. The flags are just as significant. It's the flags of the younger generation. That lady's a World War II veteran who commemorated everybody's service by doing something. So it's greatly appreciated. The other thing I've also seen is you'll see a lot of flags at the sides of veterans' graves in cemeteries across Canada. And at the same time, I think right now in Holland, the Dutch children put flags. In fact, I believe there they have to actually sort of adopt a grave, and they care for that grave for that year.
That's beautiful.
For that period of time.
I mean, they carry Canadian forces in such high esteem, of course, in Holland, indeed. We're back at City Hall, again, as the presentation of wreaths continues here this morning. Again, we want to point out that perhaps coming up in a few minutes' time, one of the final wreaths laid will be commemorating, again, going back to this, the 70th anniversary of the signing of the Korean War Armistice and the 75th anniversary of Canada, of course, participating in UN peace missions. Of course, the significance of that cannot be overlooked, of either of those cannot be overlooked on this day. You also, Paul, just to circle back to a conversation we had before we came up on air, we're talking about how you looked at the people in Korea while you were there in the summer and how they have thrived since the end.
Yeah, the first day we were there was 62 veterans. There was a day where they basically talked a little bit about what was going on in Korea. During the Korean War, I think over 3 million people were killed. And they had a youth choir on. And all I could think of when that choir was singing was 70 years ago, they would have been orphans or starving, had no place to live. And now South Korea's the 10th largest economy in the world. They've come a long way.
Yeah.
And the armistice is exactly that. Officially, they're still at war with the North side.
Right.
A ceasefire has not been signed. So they're still on tetherhooks. I actually got to visit the demilitarized zone. It's been left in the same state it was in 1953. None of the mines have been lifted. The vegetation has grown back, but it's about a 5-kilometer, I think, buffer zone between the two sides. And a spark could start there again.
Yeah, well, we've seen what's happened with their dictator leader there. What was it like to be there for you, to be in that demilitarized zone with all the context around what you just said?
It was very interesting because it was just after that American soldier had ran across the border. So we weren't allowed to cross the demarcation line. But you could, one of the persons took a picture of the Korean building. She showed us the picture afterwards, and you could see somebody else peering through the line to the window with a camera taking pictures of us. So it still is a very tense environment where the north side doesn't have freedom. I'm not a politician, but I think Mao Zedong said power over the people with the muzzle of a gun. And I think you have the same thing in North Korea. You have a dictatorship that has corrupted the minds of the people and the chances of them meeting together. At the same time, the South Koreans, they remember the war, but they're always planning for how we reunify. How do we become one country again? And they stress that a couple of times. So even though they're prepared, they're really more interested in how do we reunify and get our northern brothers and sisters back into the family.
Of course, we have an example of that in Europe, in Germany, of course, seeing that. And while we're watching the wreath presentation, I want to circle back. This is actually live at Queen's Park, where the wreaths have also been presented this morning here. All three of us have been to the Menin Gate. I had the honor to be there with the Cirillo family after Nathan Cirillo's tragic death. But I wanted to take each of you back there because some of our viewers perhaps haven't been there. But James, I'll start with you on this. The Menin Gate is a very powerful place where thousands of names of Allied soldiers are on the wall, and every day of the year they have a wreath-laying ceremony. It is a remarkable place.
It is. It's truly remarkable. I mean, really extraordinary. And I had the good fortune to go with a delegation from my regiment. My regiment's the Queen's York Rangers. We have quite a storied World War I history. So going there with a team of young soldiers and seeing that level of remembrance, that level of honor on a day-in, day-out basis. And I believe they only halted for a brief period of time when they were occupied by the Germans in the Second World War. That was the only halting. And they actually carried on the wreath-laying and name remembrance ceremonies in the UK. A delegation from that town actually carried on while the town was actually occupied by the Germans. Really, really extraordinary. And again, to my point about forging those links through generations, extremely meaningful to young troops to see that remembrance.
Absolutely. Paul, what about you, your experience at the Menin Gate?
The same point. I just read an article in the Legion magazine. They identified a missing soldier from World War I. And what I wasn't aware, because all the names of missing soldiers are on the Vimy Memorial, once he's been identified, his name is removed from the Menin Gate. So Menin Gate is still all those who have not been found, unknown dead, wherever they are. It was humbling when you look at the thousands and thousands of names. And again, like I said, it's the same thing. The ceremony.
Yeah. It's moving.
The scale of it is a bit daunting. Just like if you think about the thousands of people, all of them with families, all of them with mothers and fathers. Pretty awing.
Yeah, it is. And here we are again at Queen's Park. We'll be hearing later on from Premier Doug Ford, of course, will make an address here on Remembrance Day here. This is again another a powerful tribute, of course, to literally Ontario soldiers taken in Afghanistan here. And this is a significant, like you said, these are the modern day veterans, even though they've gone on to do other things more recently, because like you said, that war, effectively ended 10 years ago. The significance, just James, to you of the Queen's Park Memorial again, just as an Afghan veteran. I know both of you are, but James.
Yeah, it is. I think heartening to see the remembrance and to feel that outpouring of support and to see the sacrifices recognized. I think is meaningful to everyone who served in that campaign over that very long period of time. Yeah. So to me, it's quite meaningful.
And James, for you, pardon me, Paul, for you, that was your final tour as a soldier, was in Afghanistan. Did you know at the time when you left that was going to be your final tour?
Yes, that was 59.
It was clear, okay.
I was getting very close to the retirement age. The one thing that does concern me, though, about Afghanistan and that is we honor and we remember verbally very much those who served. However, I believe we lost soldiers with CSOR, Special Operations. Those people, those soldiers, and I'm sure there were some killed, their bodies never traveled down the highway of heroes for security reasons. So I still remember them, and they should be acknowledged. Hopefully at some point they will be acknowledged and their names will be published.
What do you think it will take to do that?
It depends on what operations they were on.
It's an operational security issue primarily, so that they can't name those in special forces or special operations outfits publicly for security reasons. But to Paul's point, it's got to be tough on the
It's got to be very
families.
tough on the families because they don't get I'm sure that within the operations community, they get the support, but they don't get the national support. So remember them all. You know, however they die, at the same time, the ones who died on training are just as important as someone who was killed in combat.
Absolutely, and you know, you mentioned the national level, but there's local cenotaphs around the country that are exactly like this, perhaps just on a slightly smaller scale today, as we remember nationally.
Just one interesting point, and Paul talked about that Afghanistan was his final mission. It was my first, and so this service is continuous, and the baton is simply passed from one generation to the next. When I talk about the changing face of veteranhood, it's continuous. So there's no break here. It's one generation passes to the next, and it's iterative.
And the other thing I've realized is my daughters have no real idea where I served and why. So basically, when my mother-in-law passed away, I'm going to take my two daughters and my wife, and we're going to go to Cyprus and Yugoslavia. And I'll show them where I served. Hopefully I'll find where I was carjacked in Yugoslavia, and we'll see that portion. The second portion will be taken to Angola and South Africa, where I served. I'm not going to take them to Afghanistan for obvious reasons. But at least they'll then have a chance to see where I served, why. Because a lot of families, they honestly don't understand it sometimes. You don't realize, I missed 3 Christmases. There's a lot of things that go on. The other one you'll see a lot of is when soldiers deploy, and sailors and air person, they automatically gyrate to the children for that country because it reminds you of your own children. So you try and do good things for them because it keeps you grounded that you're there also to look after the local population.
I noticed that in Haiti, very much so. It was very much about the women and the children, really, because it was really making sure they were being fed and being sheltered as much as they possibly could under those circumstances. Indeed, we're back live in Ottawa here. This is Governor General Mary Simon speaking to members of the public, it seems, who've arrived here today, of course, to sort of honor all of our veterans as well. Perhaps we can just listen in again here momentarily.
Escadron de la 8e escadre à Trenton, en Ontario, où il sert aux entraînements des cours de recherche et sauvetage. Si vous regardez vers le ciel, vous allez voir le C-630 Hercules. Ladies and gentlemen, the CC-130H.
We stand in sorrow.
Right now, we're listening to the benediction taking place at Old City Hall in Toronto.
In service for the price they paid for our safety, freedom, and duty. We remember, though, we grieve the sacrifices of the Canadian Armed Forces, veterans, and their families who lived the example of integrity, loyalty, courage, and duty. We remember those whose bodies, minds, and souls were scarred in battle and whose lives bear the wounds of war. We remember all those who were caught in the power struggles and times of conflict. We remember all those mourn the loss of their loved ones in war and who grieved the loved ones who buried at home and overseas. We remember all those served in peacekeeping missions and the families and friends who await their safe return. The wreaths we placed in front of cenotaph are a symbol of our respect, a remembrance of those who have fallen. We offer and lay this wreath in memory of those who made the ultimate sacrifice, of those who served, fought, and died, and of those who returned home with visible and invisible wounds, and who continue to suffer in the aftermath of war. May our remembering and honoring of those who served help us to live in deep gratitude, value our freedom and peace, inspire us to live in the spirit of love, peace, hope, and courage, and enable us to help and encourage and comfort others to promote the peace and welfare of all people. Amen.
Thank you so much. That was Naval Lieutenant Erin Coy. She is a unit chaplain on HMCS York, who joined the Canadian Armed Forces in 2019 as the reserve chaplain. She's an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church in Canada and works as a spiritual care practitioner in hospitals. Please stand now, if you are able, for the singing of the Royal Anthem. Thank you very much for attending the ceremony today. The choral music was performed by the Elmore Eisler Singers and under the direction of Lydia Adams. You can sit down. The band of the 7th Regiment, 7th Toronto Regiment, Royal Canadian Artillery is under the direction of Lieutenant Karina Lam, Director of Music. For more information about Toronto's role in the Korean War and UN peacekeeping missions, please visit our website at toronto.ca/remembrance. We'd also like to thank Metrolinx for their partnership of this ceremony, including the special exhibit on the fencing behind you. We invite you to join this exhibit, which recounts significant military and peacekeeping milestones that are intertwined with Toronto's past, present, and future. The parade will now march off with the Mayor, Parliamentary Secretary, and senior military officers taking the salute. Members of the public are welcome to place their poppies on the cenotaph after the vigil sentries have departed. Thank you so much for attending today, lest we forget.
Okay, that wraps up the Remembrance Day ceremony outside Old City Hall there. You just heard the Master of Ceremonies. They're saying that people can start now to lay their poppies down in the area there. In the meantime, Eden DeBeba has been there throughout the ceremony here, joins us back again live here. Eden, very moving ceremony as it always is this year, this day on Remembrance Day.
Absolutely. We heard a lot of those special points, the amount of time that Canada has been serving in the Peace Corps with the UN, you know, the 70th anniversary of the end to the Korean War. A lot hanging on this Remembrance Day, and we heard a lot of those very powerful words. You can see behind me people are starting to clear out now, but many are making their way up to the front so that they can lay their poppies on the wreaths that are at the base of the cenotaph there. A very special tradition, almost a way of marking the end of Remembrance Day, but it's something that many want to keep up in their minds even after November 11th ends. And that's why if you heard at the very end of that speech, Nick, we did hear them inviting people to come by, to see the exhibit, to learn a little more about Canada's history, about the soldiers' histories, and to keep their memories living on again past November 11th. I'll send it back to you at the desk, Nick.
Eden, thank you. I appreciate that. Gentlemen, let's talk about the last three words there, lest we forget. Paul, what do those words mean to you?
I think it's putting the onus on the individuals. Do not forget the sacrifice that's been made, both by the soldiers who gave their lives and by the families who've lost their loved ones.
Do you worry we are forgetting?
I'd like to believe we're not. I think, you know, it's a spike right now. I do talks with the Memory Project. Unfortunately, most of the requests only come in 1 week in November.
Right.
I'd be much happier if I was talking to a class in February or September, vice just that week around Remembrance Day.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. James, what about you? Those three words, lest we forget.
As was said, we dare not forget the sacrifices of those who came before us, who sacrificed to give us the quality of life in the wonderful country we have today. And I think the remedy to any sort of temptation to forget is talking to veterans, talking to those who served. And I think that's to my point about the changing face of veteranhood. And I encourage everyone, all Canadians, to talk to veterans. And they aren't the World War II generation in totality. It's younger men, younger women, folks from all different walks of life, and they're oftentimes happy to tell their story. Yeah. And it's an antidote to that forgetfulness that we have. Yeah.
Paul, you took part of the Memory Project. What does that mean to you to be invited to take part and to be able to tell your story and share your story of your service?
It's been good because I enjoyed talking to high school class and service clubs because some of the questions they ask are things I haven't really thought about. And it forces me to respond on my feet. And one of the questions I was asked, for example, was where do I want to go back to? And initially I was thinking they were all basically hellholes. Why would I want to go? And at the end, I would like to go back to Angola. Angola population was great. They've got all the resources. Unfortunately, the government at the time was backed by the Soviets. It still basically is. But the people were worth knowing. And it'd be just great to go back and see if there has been any improvement. From following them, the corruption index, they're way up there on the scale. And the MPLA, the party in power, is still taking the majority of the money for the resources. But you'd hope that there's improvements.
Have the questions changed over the years? Have you noticed a change in the tone of questions or the style, or do you find that there is a common thread, as it were?
It's fairly common. The one question, honestly, that irritates me is, have you killed anybody? That's not a soldier. That's not a question you ask a soldier. I've yet to meet a soldier who's proud of doing that. Yeah. It's between his or her God or superior being. Do you ask a doctor how many patients you had that died? Right. And I make that a point when I talk with senior groups. You don't ask that question. It's really none of your business. That's that individual doing their job. Okay? And it's not something, like I said, that I've yet to meet anyone who's proud of the fact. Yeah. They're proud of the fact they did their job, they saved their fire team partners' lives, and they got rid of a bad guy.
Yeah. That's good. That's great perspective.
We have what's called the National Veterans Week Speakers Program, which is where members of the CAF sort of fan out across the country, speaking at high schools, colleges, et cetera. It just kind of wrapped for the week, and I do find that question is fairly common as well that I've been asked, and I view that as it's fairly innocent often from youth who don't really understand the impact of the question that can have on a veteran.
Well, in the video game culture, right? It's sort of, soldiers killing people, blowing things up. That's sort of a part of how they associate, I think. In some ways.
But well before video games, movies as well, TV shows. There's a sort of a romanticization or a glorification of that aspect of it that I think doesn't go down well with a lot of veterans. But again, it's one you get asked on a fairly regular basis.
And the horror of losing somebody. When I was in Afghanistan, I was talking to a couple of medics, and when they would do their casualty treatment, and they'd lose a soldier, they then would sit down and have a debriefing afterwards, and they go through every step they had done to confirm that they had done everything they could to save that individual's life. And they said, yes, we did everything we could. It was God's will or a superior being that took him or her, but we did everything we could to save that. They still have to live with the fact that they were trying to save someone and failed, but they did everything they could.
Battlefield medicine, I mean, hard to question the efforts of battlefield doctors, medics, paramedics. I've spoken to some of them. The stories they've told they're awful. Quite frankly, it is awful.
But it's something you probably couldn't help if you were in that situation. And I've not been somebody who practiced battlefield medicine, but I would imagine you replay that sort of endlessly the rest of your life, wondering what you could have done differently.
No doubt. We're back live in Ottawa there this morning, just watching the National War Memorial as well. We've been covering National War Memorial in Ottawa, of course, Old City Hall's Memorial in Toronto. Ceremony just wrapped up. Of course, we've been showing you what's been happening at Queen's Park as well. And we're going to be taking you live to Sunnybrook Hospital momentarily as well. That's where CP24's Andrew Brennan is. But again, these are the pictures out of Ottawa. This, of course, is the biggest ceremony in Canada on this Remembrance Day. Paul, as someone who has been to the War Memorial on Remembrance Day, you take a look at the faces of these veterans as well. This really, again, shows us the makeup of our military.
The military has changed. When I first joined in 1970, it's much more diverse, much more inclusive. It's come a long way. And all those people bring in strengths that make you a stronger force.
Yeah, and that's really what it's all about, right? Isn't it? Getting more diverse, strengthening, etc. That's so important here. And as you watch the poppies being laid on the cenotaph, that is a relatively new sort of phenomenon or tradition that I've noticed, at least at Old City Hall in Toronto. I love walking by when we wrap up this program. I take every year, I walk by and I do that. Something draws me to that. What do you think of that tradition? James, I'll start with you.
I think it personalizes it. I like that. And I think traditions can gradually and gently change over time. That's quite appropriate. And I think it personalizes it for everyone who's present to sort of personally lay their poppy down and have a personal stake in the act of remembrance.
Paul, what about you?
It's exactly the same thing. It's your personal acknowledgement to, especially when you do it on the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. You're doing it to everybody. You're acknowledging everyone. It's well done.
What are the flags above your medal? I'm curious about that pin.
The airborne?
Yeah.
That just means I jumped out of airplanes.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
And the other one are DCDS commendations.
Oh, I didn't see that. Okay. Yeah. How many times did you jump out of an airplane?
I think I did about 25 civvy jumps and about 25 military.
Wow. Okay.
So.
See, in my trade, we find airplanes are great to fly in. We don't like to jump out of them. That's a misuse of equipment, essentially.
Yeah. Can we talk about, you mentioned your incident where you were held up, carjacked in Yugoslavia here. Was that the closest, the worst? I mean, how do you put that into context of your overall career?
It's still emotional, even though it happened in April 1992. I knowingly took a dangerous route because I wanted to find out what the Serbs were doing. And so did that. Basically went through Visegrad and Gorazda. I found out later at that point, the one side was operating their rape camps and stuff. Got into Gorazda. People were very nervous because we'd gotten through the barriers. And then, so you're trying to collect information, get a feel. We left. When we left, we hit a whole bunch of Serb barriers, and it was like a hot knife going through butter because we were coming from inside where they'd cordoned it off. The end, we tried to get back into Sarajevo, got stopped at Palais. They took us up to the Olympic Village. We spent the night there. And I basically said, 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm leaving. We had freedom of movement, and I believe we have freedom of movement. So even though you're scared, you still have to do your job. We left. Police car pulled us over, dropped us off where there was a Serb company. So they pointed us down the road, got about 300-400 meters, and a couple of guys jumped out. You don't argue with an AK-47 in your stomach. And then one of them jumped in the woods, and I'm still certain he said to this day, walk or I'll kill you. So we walked, a lot of sporadic fire. I told around to Karsten, the Danish officer who was with me, saying, we're gonna go back to where the Serb company was. So we do that, and I told Karsten, you walk 30 meters behind me, and he goes, why? Well, in that case, if they shoot, they only get one of us. It was a long walk, to be honest. A lot more other stuff happened. At the end, we finally got back to Sarajevo, and where it hit home was when I got back to my hotel room and that, there was an Easter card for my daughters.
Wow.
And that's when I realized I was not bulletproof. And it was like being hit with a big sledgehammer.
Yeah.
But that's when I realized I wasn't bulletproof. Yeah. But until then, I thought I was. Any soldier who says that he's not scared is lying. Okay? Everyone is scared at some point. It's how you handle that. You still have to do your job. And I got no problem with guys who are scared. Yeah. My problem is if they say, I don't want to do my job. Well, hold it. So even if you're scared, you have to do your job and do it to the best of your ability. Yeah, because you're doing it for the team, you're doing it for the nation.
Really appreciate you sharing that story. I didn't know how much detail you were going to get into, but I do appreciate that.
I could go into a lot more, but it would take too long.
Right. Okay, well, listen, before we continue our conversation, we're going to go back to our Andrew Brennan. He is actually live this morning at Sunnybrook Veterans Center, where, of course, they've been honoring the veterans there. We had a glimpse of it. We were talking earlier. Andrew, thanks for joining us again. What's happening there now?
Hi, Nick. Right now, we're just about to get one of the veterans in Sunnybrook in dedication to her friends, her family, and the people that they've lost over the years that were given care here at Sunnybrook. Brenda's giving a final blessing, a poem, A Little Red Flower. As she comes up to the stage now, I think there's one thing that sort of stuck with me is the person to her immediate right. As that veteran came up to the dais, he said an Irish blessing, saying particularly to the people that they've lost, that they will see them again, and until then, thank you and goodbye. We have children here that have been singing from John Wenlis Public School. It's in the dedication of the wreaths, one thing that the chaplain said is that since 1948, Sunnybrook has been here for veterans and continues to be here for veterans. You know, there's one of the wreaths of flowers is for World War I veterans. Now there's none left. The World War II vets that have been here for some cases going on decades. There's not as many of them left as we would want, but the thought of remembering and the concept of remembering is more than just thinking about who's gone. It's remembering what is here because of what they did while they were here. And I think that's one of the poignant parts of ceremonies like this. You know, don't forget that even when the Toronto Maple Leafs came to Sunnybrook earlier this week, I see several veterans, by the way, wearing Maple Leafs gear right now. You know, that was on ice heroes coming to meet real life heroes, and the dedication, the amount of people here is an indication of the dedication that people have to giving them the respect they deserve and saying thank you year after year. Nick, we're going to send it back to you as this poem and dedication continues from Brenda.
Okay, Andrew Brennan, live at Sunnybrook. Appreciate this. Of course, we're marking 75 years since, of course, Sunnybrook Veterans Hospital opened. This is live pictures back again in Ottawa. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau speaking to the crowd, shaking hands as a Remembrance Day service at the National War Memorial wraps up. We're also getting close to wrapping up our Remembrance Day special here on CP24, and I just want to say to both of you, thank you both so much for joining us this morning. I really appreciate the candor, the insight, and of course the ability to help guide us through this program. Paul, before I let you go, if perhaps we could get some final thoughts from you on this Remembrance Day 2023 and your thoughts here.
It's different being here rather than being on parade. Mm-hmm. It's been interesting watching all the different places and how they all get the same theme. Thank you for inviting me, and it's given me a chance to talk about to a much greater audience than I've ever had a chance to talk to before.
Well, our audience has benefited from it indeed. James, over to you as well. This is your third year now of joining us here.
It is, and I guess I'd close. I think I closed this way last year as well, despite encouragement to all the viewers and listeners to talk to veterans, and again, of all generations, of all walks of life. You know, here in Toronto, we have a primarily reserve Army formation made up of your neighbors, your students, police officers, firefighters, folks from all different environments. On this day and this week in particular, but the stories are good all year round, as we've heard today. So it really is an encouragement to connect and to make that bridge that generational divide with our veterans.
Not just for 1 week in November. Listen, it's been a privilege, my privilege in particular, to be sitting next to both of you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your service. Do appreciate that so much. And of course, thanks to all of our viewers as well, who've joined us here for the last 90 minutes, as well as we have followed Remembrance Day ceremonies from across Toronto. Thank you so much for joining us here. It's really been a pleasure. We, of course, have Toronto's headlines coming up right after this, and again, as we mark Remembrance Day 2023.